Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, you lovely folks joining me here nice and early over at Marvel's Snap Zone. Hopefully you're doing very well. It's great to see you. Hopefully all is well with you, as much as it is with me, and hopefully it remains in the world of Marvel Snap. It is time for our weekly tier list update. And by God, am I excited for this one. We've got a lot of movers, a lot of shakers, a lot of things changing in the Marvel Snap landscape. So many players making their way into Pool 2, into Pool 3 since the global release. And I'm glad to be back and able to cover these decks for you, show you what we can find, look at the data, see what's good out there in terms of grinding cubes for Snap and what needs a little bit more work for the future. So as always, folks, if you enjoy this content, you want more of the same, make sure you hit that subscribe button for us down below. Make sure you turn on notifications, otherwise you won't see when this work goes up. But, super exciting stuff for tier list this week. Sorry it's a little bit late. I've been out of the office, which means it took me a little bit longer to get myself caught up on all things Marvel Snap this week. But, last week, we kind of mentioned it was quite rare to see so much innovation towards the end of a season. Normally because players are looking to play established decks or reliable decks to finish their climb up to infinite. However, we were admitting those who climbed the ladder to crazy high ranks and constantly kept trying to find the next gem, and actually sometimes do find those gems in the higher ranks, which means that it's not fair to us, not fair for us to necessarily admit those players. And that's definitely been the case during this last week. KM Best, previously known as Kanye Best, one of our very own, has been dominating Marvel Snap. One of the best Marvel Snap players in the world currently has shared a very unique view on the otherwise long untouched Death Wave archetype, adding an Arrow and Magneto into the mix. And the deck has been praised by most players that get their hands on it, and it seems like we have a dominant new deck on our hands for the first time in a very long time. In other news, the discard synergy also on the way up this week, as is that Dracula Lockjaw kind of pairing that we talked about in the previous weeks that's been in the works, finally getting some data behind it to prove that it may in fact be a contender. As for the decks that we knew about, negative serotonin keeps on progressing all the way back up our tier list with a below average win rate but a fantastically, just incredible great cube average. On the downswing, Patriot and Destroyer, two decks that are still very solid by all means, but see their numbers impacted and changed by people choosing to make changes to other decks in the metagame overall. Kazoo also looking significantly worse, unfortunately, considering how dominant Destroy currently is, and Killmonger being in basically every single deck based around destroying. As a result, that deck gets forced to play Armor, which means that our budget Pool 2 list actually feels like it might be the best option out there for Kazoo, so feel free to check that one out. There is a lot to cover this week. What can I say? It's been one of the biggest weeks in Snap ever, especially given that we have a brand new season past the Wakandan season just starting today as well. So plenty to be excited about. Everyone gets ready to climb back up to Infinite, and although we've received no balance changes to spice things up this week, there are definitely several decks I can't wait to talk about, and you should definitely be following. So let's take a look at this week's overall tier list in just a second. We'll stick it up on the screen. If what you want is a written copy of this, you can find it in the article down below. Just before we do though, got to thank the resources that we use in order to make this tier list. It would not be possible without the following. MarvelSnap.pro now collaborating with us over here at Marvel Snap Zone, doing some great work driving the data behind Marvel Snap. You should definitely check them out if you haven't done so already. SnapFan doing similar work, great stuff, great data, cube win rate averages available to those looking for that kind of stuff. And their community Discord server a fantastic help as well. Snapdecks on Twitter featuring your work and our work and all the great deck lists out there from all those Marvel Snap users. Go ahead and check them out. And Marvel Snap IO, very much similar prospects there. Great data, great deck lists, well worth checking out. Last but not least, all the players who offer their insight and time to come and chat with us to make this list. It wouldn't be possible without you, so thank you very much for doing exactly that. Okay, no more stalling. Let's share in the excitement. What finds itself on our tier list this week? Okay then, so as you can see, a lot of new, a lot of up, a lot of down, plenty of movement, and that's really exciting. Sera Miracle remains at the top of the game, continues to be a tier 1 linchpin of Marvel Snap, but it is joined by two brand new contenders this week in the form of Bayro, the Arrow deck we previously referred to, built by KM Best, and Deathpool making its way all the way up in a very similar way as a result of that overall success. Negative serotonin continues to climb all the way back into tier 2, regardless of all those nerfs of the past. Patriot falling down out of tier 1, doesn't quite have what it takes to hang with Destroy this week, not quite as popular a choice. Zero, however, making its way up, one of those other Destroy decks that kind of fell out of favour as Deathpool and stuff kind of took over, but definitely shining this week as Deathpool and other Destroy strategies kind of take priority on the grinding ladder. Dracula Lockjaw, this combo deck we've been kind of ominously referring to in the background of the tier list the past few weeks. Finally enough data to talk about it. I look forward to sharing it with you. And of course, it makes itself known in tier 2 alongside Destroyer, which is making its way down there this week. Lockjaw on reveal, tier 3's linchpin this week, but it is coming down from tier 2. Not the best week for the on reveal strategies, definitely being outshined by some of our other options. Similar story for Wong reveal, control, making its way down into tier 3, not having a great time at handling these discard decks. Very much the same for Wong going, another deck kind of hit by the increased amount of play of Enchantress overall. Hella Sandman, discard, kind of not having the best time all around. Outside of this Lockjaw deck I'm excited to share with you, still finds itself in tier 4, very much like the Dracula discard deck as well. A couple more that have been here for a while now in tier 4, the Bounce deck, the Movement deck, and Mr. Negative, all reasonable curveball choices, but not quite having enough gusto behind them to hang with the big boys right now. Some budget options available for you on our tier list as always. If you want exportable deck lists, article is for you in the description box below. You've got some full guides, all kinds of information, and just a list to go and import directly into Snap. Go click that, go check it out, make sure that you are subscribing over at Marvel Snap Zone as well. So, if you're not sure how any of these things work or even what they look like, it's my turn to take you through and show you some of what we're working with on the ladder right now. So, not going to spend too much time on Sera Miracle at this point. This deck is kind of a known quantity. It's been one of the biggest kingpins of Snap for a very, very long time. And although Enchantress is definitely the most popular tech card in the game right now, that can hurt Sera, of course. But Sera Miracle just consistently delivers over and over again, regardless of that tech choice. This deck seems to be the definition of what Marvel Snap is pushing to achieve, as it possesses 3 of the strongest traits we think a Marvel Snap deck can have. It has strong explosive potential in the late game, it has huge unpredictability on turn 6, and it has the ability to snap very early based on its hand. Counters to this deck definitely exist, but they aren't played nearly enough to punish Sera Miracle out of the metagame, allowing it to keep a top spot for yet another week. If you're not familiar with how to play this one, we've talked about it en masse in these tier lists a number of times. You're based around Sera, you're looking to have a spectacular turn 6 as a result. You can play some cards early if you need to in the form of things like Bishop and Angela, but for the most part you're looking for very flexible turn 6s with very large amounts of stats. Excuse me. However, the more exciting deck to take a look at this week, I'm so hyped. Like, it's so hard to find a new archetype in Marvel Snap at the moment, and it's been incredible to see kind of this Bayro deck make its way out of the woodwork, courtesy of KM Best, one that definitely hasn't been noticed by anyone else previous to this. A brand new arrival on our tier list, Bayro is a brand new creation based on the Death Wave archetype. From what I understand, KM Best is crediting Fuzzy CB and Loot Muncher 0 for pushing Aero as a card that we should be playing in this deck, and largely inspired this build. Although it's difficult to kind of gauge the deck based solely on KM Best's opinion and rank, which if you're not familiar is like 600 at this point. The feedback from other players trying out this deck is just stellar as well. Everyone seems to agree that it is a universal powerhouse. So as such, we have to acknowledge there's very little data about it right now, but we do believe that Bayro deserves to enter our tier list as one of the best decks in the game. If you're looking to play this one for yourself, the deck gets mostly split into 2 parts, setting up your late game and reaping the rewards of doing so. Your early game is built around doing 2 things. Getting ahead in as many lanes as possible and getting 2 kills so that you can discount death by 2, allowing you to play her and another card on the same turn that you play Wave. You have several effective ways of doing this. Carnage plus Bucky Barnes is a very incredibly efficient threat. Mysterio creates tokens that can be killed off by Carnage and Deathlock, while also being a hidden 5 power on another location. And of course, things like the Hood and Nova just die to Carnage, Killmonger, and even Deathlock, while leaving you some advantage behind in the process. Once you've achieved this, we just want to slam Wave on the board on turn 5, setting up our Death plus another card combo, and preventing the opponent from doing much on their side. Then, while Death represents our points to lock up a lane that we play her into, we can use Magneto or Arrow in order to pull opposing cards away from the other location we were already ahead on. Because Wave limits how many cards the opponent can play, Arrow and Magneto rarely have the problem of being played in a lane that could be filled by the opponent on turn 6 only. Everything about this deck can be found in a dedicated article written by KM Best. So if you're looking for this one, that article is linked in our article down below. Go check it out, read the guide, and start smashing Bayro on the ladder for yourself. Our other tier 1 choice this week, Deathpool. Cosmo and Armor are great cards to counter destroy effects right now. It seems like, but it does kind of seem like the most popular tech card in the metagame at the moment is Enchantress, which does nothing against Deathpool. Deathpool is also just very, very happy to see Killmonger being a popular card as well, as there isn't a single one-cost card in the deck that isn't just happy to have get destroyed. The only thing casting the shadow on this deck is Bayro being quite similar and considered arguably stronger by many players early, which is just a little bit more attractive for the most recent brew. This deck is very much based around trying to kill Deathpool as many times as you possibly can to increase its power over and over again, reducing Death's cost in the process. Then you get to copy Deadpool's power with Taskmaster alongside playing Death on turn number 6 thanks to Wave's ability. The deck has a very nice upside of naturally playing around normal board disruption like goblins or rocks. Outside of those kind of 4 key cards mentioned there, the rest of the deck is either designed entirely to help Deadpool get bigger in things like Carnage or Venom or Hulkbuster, or benefit from being destroyed themselves, cards like Bucky Barnes, Nova, and the Hood. Venom, super flexible in this deck, not required. Usually just another good destroy outlet that's a good target for Taskmaster, but you can definitely play things like Arnim Zola in this deck if you're missing that slot. Tier 2 this week. Couple of new shiners over here as well. Negative Serotonin kind of continuing to rise from the ashes. While SnapFan still hasn't shown an above 50% win rate for this deck in a long time, the cube average earned by this deck is rising week after week after week, now competing with many of those tier 1 decks. Similar to Sera Miracle, but way less consistent, Negative Serotonin seems like the definition of a snap and retreat kind of type of deck. It's okay to accept a lot of small losses over and over, as long as it gets those big 8 cube wins from time to time. This deck is focusing very much on being played, maximizing its great hands, folding its bad ones. You should be snapping with your hands being good more often than not. A hand worth snapping will normally include Mr. Negative or Sera. They're your big enablers for a deck like this. One is one of the things to consider regarding Mr. Negative, the amount of low power cards you already have in your hand by turn 4. It might not be worth playing it if that's the case. If Iron Man, Mystique, Rogue, Wolfsbane and such cards are kind of already in your hand, it's going to be hard to get much benefit out of Mr. Negative. So if that scenario happens, you can look to just become a regular Sera deck, or simply retreat and move on to another game. Becoming a Sera deck only is going to lower your point ceiling, but with Angela, Bishop, Mojo and other high scorers, you can still compete in those games without having to immediately retreat. Definitely one that's kind of a known quantity here, but continuing to improve week on week. Not improving this week, however, Patriot. This is the first week in a long time Patriot hasn't ranked among the best decks in the game, but Enchantress on a signature card is very, very bad for this deck, so its pick up in popularity proving to be pretty bad for Patriot. Killmonger also a problem for this one, honestly. A lot of one-cost tokens get flood the board here, courtesy of rocks and debris, so on and so forth, and Killmonger very, very good against those and things like Squirrel Girl. Which is very, very popular right now due to Death making a very solid comeback. The deck's still super playable, but we need to be more careful with our snaps. There's way more tech cards running around. Really simple on this one, your payoff cards, Patriot, Blue Marvel, Onslaught, looking to create as many duplicates of those buff effects as possible, similar to Khazar. Looking to just make your token creatures basically so much larger if they have no effects. You can duplicate those abilities with Mystique or with Onslaught, and in some versions you can even use cards like Magic or Adam Warlock to secure extra draw steps to have bigger finishing turns. The rest of the deck, completely full of cheap recipients of buffs. You're looking to fill 2 locations you want to focus on and then play your payoffs on the 3rd location in the middle. Ultron offers a different path to victory so that you can fill 2 locations with it, making this deck extremely passive in the early game sometimes. Okie dokie then. So, Patriot not having the best week all round, but definitely still a viable archetype. Zero Destroy, kind of another discussion point of Enchantress becoming a premium card in the current metagame. Almost every deck is playing a useful ongoing card of some sort. As a result, Zero didn't really have to change anything to become, to become a bad matchup for a lot of those decks. In our view, this explains its rise in popularity this week. Another nice upside of this deck is that it's also, another destroy deck at its core, playing a small number of cards per lane, making Red Skull quite strong into opposing destroy decks who are doing a very similar thing. We're built around the gating of the negative abilities of Typhoid Mary and Red Skull here, mixing several other synergies in the process. Destroying things with Carnage and Venom, looking to remove the abilities with cards like Zero, Enchantress. The last card included in the deck to kind of get the points without the downside from Red Skull is a thing like Taskmaster or Arnim Zola to be able to abuse that synergy too. As a result, the deck plays very similarly to most of the other Destroy decks right up until turn 4. It looks to set up cards to eat later on, things like Nova, Bucky Barnes, Sabretooth, Mysterio clones. And once in the late game, you should be able to plan, around your big point scorers. Look to, find play patterns where you can maximize them and minimize downsides on single locations. Things like Zero have to be played beforehand, but Typhoid Mary, Red Skull need those effects removed really. So try and play Zero beforehand if you can, or surprise your opponent by playing Enchantress, Venom, or Taskmaster afterwards. At least you have some very surprising turn 6s. Good stuff, nice to see Zero holding its own this week. This is another deck I'm just super excited about, another brand new addition to our tier list this week, Dracula Lockjaw. Just like Bayro, gained tons of momentum recently, loads of talk on Reddit, and even though there is still kind of arguably not enough data for this one, the surrounding feedback seems good enough to offer it a tier 2 placement for now. So, it's going to be maybe a surprise element of having a big impact, or maybe the deck's just legitimately good. But it looks like an improvement over where the other discard decks are right now. If Cosmo becomes more popular than it currently is, that could definitely be a problem for this deck, so do keep your eyes open for that one. This deck is looking to use Lockjaw in order to maximize your discard effects. When we start going off, your hand should just kind of melt away into nothing. This means it's really important to kind of find either Swarm or Apocalypse before you start going off. If you do, Swarm is going to give you potential explosive plays when played behind Lockjaw later on, and Apocalypse just grows to stupidly large amounts. With Morbius, Lockjaw, and Dracula in the deck, it's entirely possible to start discarding on turn 5, and never beforehand, once the cards that you don't want to lose are on the board and safe and out of the way. Hela is a bit of a surprise card here and unlocks another way to gain tons of points from all the discards we made during the game. She definitely isn't as strong here as she is in other discard decks, but she can trigger a ton of different discard effects, which can grow Apocalypse for Dracula or pump Morbius while still summoning other units to the board. For now, the discard decks picked are the ones granting the most points, but feel free to experiment with Gambit or Moon Knight if you feel like it. America Chavez, definitely another card that can be replaced in some of these decks and gets played in a number of them for overall consistency and not much other reason, so consider making that switch as well if you like. Destroyer, a deck unfortunately on a decline right now. Clearly the Destroy synergy is the best thing you can be doing in Snap at the second, but it looks like Death is reaping most of the benefits from that. With both Deadpool and Bayro kind of feeling fresher and able to develop more points, Destroyer was a bit left aside this week. In addition to that, the amount of decks running the Destroy core of like Nova, Bucky Barnes, The Hood, Killmonger, forced a lot of good matchups for Destroyer to kind of like stop being popular because they don't want to be weakened to those cards against absolutely everybody. With Armor and Cosmo in this deck, there are definitely ways for you to combat the death-based decks in this build. However, Destroyer isn't very flexible in terms of a deck because it kind of needs a critical mass of stuff to do its own game plan. Also, the Goblins are kind of almost worthless if they're not protected by Cosmo being played after them, or Armor so that the opponent can't destroy them in those matchups. If you're not familiar with this one and how to play it, Warpath is kind of a king alongside a thing like Destroyer. It's one of the few decks that's going to focus on 2 locations only over the course of the game. It can contest the third one with Green Goblin or Hobgoblin if it really wants to, although it definitely doesn't have to. Destroyer's effect is going to go off on turn 6, We're going to try and be playing cards to a third location if we need to have extra points to contribute. They're happy to be destroyed. Things like Bucky Barnes. But for the locations you want to compete on, you're going to be trying to lock them up with armor and then play things you're happy to destroy on the other one. Hopefully armor can keep things like Warpath and the Demon from the Hood safe, as they're your biggest point scorers all around. Okie dokie, Lockjaw on reveal, finding itself in Tier 3 this week. It suffered from recent changes, both from previous patches and the metagame shift. The recent change to Jubilee in the patch has removed one potential high roll card from how she works. And as for the metagame, the deck has, kind of needs to stop running Green Goblin and Scorpion, as both cards tend to do things that are really bad against Destroy and don't really offer you any real advantage. Instead, we see Storm and Okoye taking their spots at the same mana costs. Wave also seems like a risky move when Death is a popular card to be playing. One thing worth noting, the deck recently has started to include Leader as a payoff at the top end, which is a great counter to Death and their very strong turn 6s. Even if the card gets pulled by Lockjaw early on, you can still use Odin to trigger it later to kind of have that same effect. So Lockjaw on reveal, finding itself in Tier 3 this week. Definitely strong enough to bounce back in the future, but a tough week all around. Okay, so Wong reveal, another kind of on-reveal archetype, but utilizing Wong as a powerhouse this time around. Thanks to Leader, the on-reveal decks are definitely capable of matching the power of Death and Sera on turn 6, which is kind of what's making them viable currently. However, Lockjaw is kind of ranked higher because Wong itself gets eaten alive by Enchantress and Cosmo, something Lockjaw manages to avoid. Otherwise, the deck still feels pretty decent in the current environment. Wong is an incredible card when it's left unanswered. It's just a shame that it actually is answered way more often right now than one would wish when you're playing a deck like this, making it kind of worse than other high-profile cards that Marvel Snap has to offer. This deck is mostly looking to abuse Wong and Odin in the on-reveal synergy shell, very much looking to separate the first 3 and the last 3 turns of the game. In the last 3 turns, you're going to be looking to set up very dedicated combo lines, playing Wong on turn 4, finding either White Tiger, Rescue, or Wave on turn 5, and then looking to set up these kind of ridiculous payoff turns at the end. So Odin, of course, re-triggering White Tiger, exceptionally powerful under Wong. Doctor Doom or Leader, very, very good alongside Wong. You can also just play these cards on turn 5 and turn 6 after playing, on turn 6 I should say, after playing Rescue on turn 5 to give that extra stat boost all around. A really cool little play pattern this one has as well, Wave on turn 5 on another location than Wong, plus Psylocke on Wong's location. Kind of gives you 2 cards on turn 6 because you're going to have 8 energy and everything is going to cost 4, and that's a very, very sweet play pattern. The first 3 turns of this game are going to be dedicated to disrupting your opponent, creating a good environment where your late game sequences should win all by themselves. Cards like Storm, Iceman, and Sandman are going to be included to annoy your opponent while they don't affect your own strategy. And Ebony Maw is included to kind of get reveal priority early and get at least a good turn from Wong before it gets cancelled out by one of your opponent's many tech cards for it at the moment. Control finding its way, kind of niggling down a little bit. The Skians version of this deck we kind of covered last week is definitely the de facto way to play this deck right now. Given the popularity of Destroy decks, trying to annoy your opponent with rocks or playing like several one-cost cards feels pretty suboptimal at best. And so the lane control deck that's usually featured in this, this deck, kind of not really viable for now, and this Skians alternative, definitely the way to go. The other way to build control with more reactive cards, obviously better when we've talked about Enchantress, a chunk at this point. But the deck is also filled with cards that could derail the opponent's strategy like Shang-Chi, Dr. Octopus, and of course the ever-powerful Killmonger. Ironically, it also kind of uses the Destroy core of Nova, the Hood, and Carnage, which is just featured in so many of the decks that it's trying to counter because that package is just unreal strong right now. If you're not sure how to play this one, the first 2 or 3 turns, you can consider them proactive. Angela, Mysterio, Nova, play to the board, these kind of things. And then the second part of the game, you're going to only really see Captain Marvel and Sera as proactive plays. The rest of what you're going to be doing is quite reactive to your opponent. You're either going to be trying to manipulate energy, make the game longer with a card like Magic, Sera, making all your stuff cheaper on turn 6. Look to answer what your opponent has already done with cards like Enchantress, Shang-Chi, or Killmonger, or use a card like Dr. Octopus to force your opponent to dump most of their hand onto one location, making it very hard for them to compete on the other 2 locations. A really sweet deck. Hopefully it can find itself having a better week next week, but it's definitely kind of struggling in the face of the fact it doesn't do particularly great things in the face of the popular decks right now. Last but not least, Wong making an appearance on the tier list this week, kind of having the same issues as the Wong on reveal deck. Definitely some surprise power to it still, especially given that Armor and Cosmo are great anti-destroy cards right now. Not necessarily as good in Wong ongoing, but definitely very, very much a necessity in terms of what you're needing to do against the metagame right now. Thanks to those 2 cards, however, this deck seems able to reasonably annoy Deathpool and Bayro, which is just super important right now in the current metagame. This could potentially represent a way for Wong to get some momentum back in the future, so don't panic if this is your favourite archetype. It definitely has the ability to climb. This deck's looking to play Wong on turn 4, Mystique to copy its ability on turn 5, and then Spectrum on turn 6 to add a pile of stats to every single ongoing card you've managed to play before it. So the rest of the deck, just cheap, efficient ongoing cards ready to get Spectrum's blessing when she hits the board. The key to this deck, once we know the combos on the way, is to kind of spread out ongoing cards in order to contest 2 locations and not accidentally stack them up on the same location if we can help it. Apart from those kind of key cards, the rest of the deck is filled with, tech choices. Definitely want them to be ongoing cards where possible. At the moment, those are definitely just going to have to be Cosmo and Armor against the established metagame. Which is making this deck a viable contender all around. So, the metagame has been stale for, honestly, quite some time since closed beta. It's only logical the team at Second Dinner focused on new players and did their best to welcome them, but having 2 fresh decks is just such a breath of fresh air, and it shows that we aren't done experimenting in all things tier 3 in Marvel Snap yet, even without a major balance patch. With the new season here, I expect a lot of changes for next week. We're going to see a very competitive environment all around where people are looking to climb. Currently, one could argue that a deck succeeding is merely facing careless opponents, just kind of enjoying their time in the infinite rank. It'll also be great to see how newcomers like Bayro and Lockjaw, Dracula kind of evolve with a bit more time to develop moving forward. I'm very excited to see what happens, and although Black Panther really hasn't found a home on day 1, it definitely could in the near future. The on-reveal synergy decks definitely need a little bit of help currently as well. Hopefully the card becomes a good anchor to a location for a deck like Lockjaw or Wong. If you want to talk about this article or this video or discuss anything with the team, feel free to come and join our community Discord server in the description box down below and let us know what you think about the metagame right now. I'd love to hear more about it. Alternatively, if you want to chat with me personally, come and hit me up over on Twitter over at HowlingMines. I'll be more than happy to talk all things Snap with you, or you can come and have a chat with Den in Discord as well. Until next time, until next week, I have been HowlingMines, you have been amazing, and this has been Marvel Snap Zone. Stay safe out there.